Well, thank you all so much for being here today. I want to welcome you to this conversation on race. I think it's important for people really across the country to have these conversations. If we've learned anything recently, it's that it is far past time for all of us to actively engage in these discussions if we want to move forward. And so I'm really looking forward to listening to our guests today as they discuss their past experiences in the context of the racial justice movement we're seeing today. It's an incredible group that we have for this conversation, and I'm going to just give a brief introduction of everyone on the call today. First, we have Roger Terry, a former deputy mayor and deputy police chief of Montclair and the chair of the Political Action Committee of the Montclair NAACP. I'm so grateful that you're joining us today, Roger. I've been thinking a lot about the conversation we had a few years back about your interaction almost 50 years ago with the police in Newark, and I just keep thinking, how is this still happening? How are we still here after all this time? We also have your family. So thank you so much for bringing your daughter, Rhonda Robinson from Montclair as well, an executive at an insurance company in New York City, and your grandson, Gary Robinson Jr., who's a sophomore at Southern Connecticut State University. So thank you so much for opening up about your experiences that really span generations. And we also have a non-Montclairian, and we have Leslie Allen from Morristown. And Leslie, I read your powerful piece about the United States Tennis Association statement on Black Lives Matter. And so thank you for being here to share your stories. For those of you who don't know Leslie, she's a retired professional tennis player. She was ranked number 17 in the world in singles and number 10 in doubles. And when she won the Avon Championships tennis event in 1981, she became the first African-American woman to win a significant pro tennis tournament since Althea Gibson in 1958. And in a kind of amazing coincidence, Althea Gibson happens to be Roger's aunt, which is really, we didn't even know until we gathered everyone together and started talking about this event. So Roger, can we start with you? As I mentioned, the story you told me about your experience in Newark in high school has really stuck with me. Would you mind starting there and telling the viewers about that?
Sure, Mikey. First of all, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for what you're doing. You're doing tremendous work. You know, I follow you along with the Montclair Dems and a lot of people here. You're doing a great job, and please keep up the good work. In these times that are very difficult, we need strong representation like you.
That means a lot coming from you. Thank you.
I would not have even imagined that after growing up in the 60s, that we would be going through some of the same problems in this country that we are right now. You would have thought that after landing someone on the moon and all we went forward with, finishing the Vietnam War, some mistakes there, and moving forward, that we would have been much further forward in this country. So from somebody who has grown up in a very wonderful town like Montclair, a diverse town like Montclair, was almost like a secluded hamlet. You're away from a lot of the problems around the country, and to see what's going on now, it's tough, very difficult to look at. But for me, watching some of that on TV, watching how women and children were treated by law enforcement officers, it created a level of anger, in myself and a lot of my friends that ran deep for a long time. I knew individuals that wanted to join the Panthers. I thought about it even myself. I knew people that wanted to join the New World of Islam and some of the real radical groups back in the 60s. Even Martin Luther King, as much as the young people loved him, they loved Malcolm X the same also, and they loved his word. So in that light, in 1967, I just received my license and driving around just like young people do. We figured one day we would go up to Eagle Rock and view what was going on down in Newark. If you know anything about the Newark Riots of 1967, it started like on almost like some fake news. There was a report that a black cab driver had been beaten by the police, and in that long hot summer, it turned into something very, very ugly. Um, the Someone, I'm not sure who made the decision. They brought in the National Guard. Sure, it was some city officials and the state police. So my friends and I one night made the decision to go up to Eagle Rock and take a look at what was going on down in Newark. And I've never been in a war zone or anything like that. You know, looking at that from Eagle Rock, and I think you guys know where Eagle Rock is. Maybe Leslie doesn't. You know, it's a view of the entire region here. It's a wonderful view. And you're
I think
able to,
George Washington used it to spy on troops in Manhattan.
that's right. That's exactly right. You could see all of the fires burning in Newark. And somehow or another, we got the bright idea, well, let's go down there and take a look. Now, mind you, that was a bad mistake and a bad decision. And I want to emphasize that because many times young people make bad mistakes and decisions. It shouldn't be a life-threatening situation, but that's what young people do, and that's what we did. So we took a ride down there. I guess in the back of my mind, I imagine what a curfew was like, not really truly knowing at 17 how strong a curfew could be in a situation like that. Also, on the Life cover of Life magazine, there was an individual by the name, maybe I shouldn't say his name now, but he's from Montclair. And it showed him being shot and killed while looting in a liquor store. That was on the cover of Life magazine or something. So we figured let's go down there and take a ride and take a look. And I had my father's 1964 Plymouth Fury at 2 bench seats. So I could fit 4 people in the front and 4 in the back. And we took a ride down there with all my buddies like that. Well, it didn't get real until we got stopped by the National Guard, you know, and they were in a half track. And now I'm trying to turn around and they said, halt, pull over. And I looked at my brother and I'm like, oh my God, what have we done now? We're in trouble. So, you know, they asked for the credentials and actually they were pretty nice. They were pretty nice credentials. I said, look, I'm from Montclair. I have no business being down here. They said, well, you're not bringing any guns down here. I've told them I've never seen a gun in my life or touched a gun. And neither did any of the other individuals who were in the car. Many of them were athletes or students at Montclair High School. So they said, well, you know, we believe you, but we just want to check you out a little further. And they sent the state police. They called for them and sent them. And when they pulled up, I looked at my brother and said, oh man, we're in trouble. They had a very nasty look on their face. The first thing that they said getting out the car is, what are you ins doing down here? So again, I explained to them that, you know, we're from Montclair. You know, we had gone to Eagle Rock. We took a look around and they weren't buying that at all. They said, you're bringing guns down here. We know you got guns in this car. And they began taking apart my father's car looking for guns. Now, mind you, this is in the 60s. That was my father's work car. It was no pleasure car or anything like that. So all I could think about in even a dangerous situation is, man, my father, boy, he's going to kill me, man, when I get home, boy. So unfortunately, it got a little bit hostile. And one of my friends said something smart, and they started swinging. And the whole time that my brother and I were getting hit, all I could think about is like, wow, these are grown men, man. We're just like kids. Why would they want to hit us like this and beat us like this? Well, thankfully, there was a shooting. We could hear the shots down the street. They stopped and they said, get the hell out of here, you know, and we got in the car and turned around. Now, I've never told my parents about that. First of all, there would have been another beating. In those days, you know, there would have been some issues. My father had known I put myself in a position like that. Take full responsibility for making that mistake, and it was a mistake. But you know, it had kind of like a lasting effect that I just couldn't believe. Like, for me, I could see, or anyone could see that we're just regular kids. We're bringing any guns around. We're dressed well. We had a car. We had all of our credentials and everything like that. And I remember some years later having a discussion with my mother, who was a all-around patriot, a hamburger, hot dog, apple pie eating American. She worked for the municipal court system. She worked with the police department in town. And I want to say also that the majority of the police officers I knew growing up were great people. They were coaches, they were Cub Scout leaders, they worked in the parks with us. They knew us. Everyone knew each other, so they were good. There were some maybe negative, little negative situations maybe we had over the years, but nothing like that. And I can remember my mother, and I told her, I didn't tell her exactly what happened, but I told her I didn't like the police. Much like many of the kids you hear today. I think that they're very negative, that they're not nice people, some of them. And she encouraged me to join the police department, and that's when that story started there. And I tell you, if you are a very conscientious person, someone who cares about people, that is the best job in the world. But if you're someone who doesn't like to work with people, who are very narrow-minded about the type of people that you need to work with, it could be the worst job in the world. And we see some of that now. So that's some of a long story I made short. I could have made it like a little bit longer, other pieces to it. But I know you, Mikie, and I have had the discussion before.
I wanna ask you more about that, Roger, because I'm kind of curious about your transition from that experience in Newark to joining the police force. But let's hear. But I also want to make sure we have time to hear from everyone. So do you want to talk kind of bring Rhonda in and talk a little bit about what you know of her experiences, and she can tell us too what she's experienced?
Well, first of all, I'm very grateful that my family's here. Family to me means everything. And to have my daughter and my grandson here is like a grand slam, not even a home run, but a grand slam. And not only, they're good people, they're very supportive individuals. And I can let Rhonda speak about her own, of how she grew up in a police family and around law enforcement officers all of her life. So Rhonda, if you want to speak.
As long as she only says nice stuff about her dad, right?
Absolutely. He paid me yesterday.
Online anyway.
Yes. Did. So yeah, thank you for this opportunity. And absolutely, I mean, I've been really fortunate to grow up in a town like Montclair. I mean, this has been a tremendous experience for me. And not only did I grow up in a great town, I was fortunate that my dad was part of the Montclair Police Department. So my entire life, I've been around police officers. Yeah, they would come to my track meets when I was running track at the high school. Every Christmas we had holiday parties thrown by the PBA. Some of the best moments for my brother and I. Just my entire life was spent around law enforcement, and I've been very comfortable around law enforcement. So with my experience, I grew up with a high level of trust with police. So I'd come home from college and I was hanging out with friends. We'd gone to a club and I needed to drop some folks off. So I went to Irvington to drop someone off in Irvington. And I was the last person in the car. And then I said, oh no, I'm directionally challenged. I will admit that. I have lots of strengths. That's not one of them. And I'm thinking, do I get back on the Parkway north or south to get back to Montclair? And unfortunately, I got on the Parkway going in the wrong direction. So you're thinking this is like 1991 or, somewhere along those. There's no cell phones, there's few pay phones that I'm seeing, and it's pretty late at night. It's in the middle of the night. We had gone to a club. And so I'm driving around, really lost, trying to get my way back to Montclair. So I'm off some road, and I looked in a parking lot off this highway, and I see a police car and I see a policeman out of the police car, and he's digging in the trunk of a regular car. So I said, oh, thank God, the police are there. I'm going to go over here and get directions for someone to help me to get back home. So I get off the ramp. I pull in the parking lot where the police officer is. Again, it's about 2:00 in the morning. And he's got his back to me. He's digging in the trunk. And as I walk up, I said, oh, excuse me, sir. I'm trying to get back to Montclair. Can you point me in the direction to get back to Montclair? And as he comes out of the trunk of not the police car, the standard car, he comes out with a shotgun or rifle, one of those two. And he puts it over his shoulder. And, I'm kind of taken aback because here I am with this person I don't know in the middle of the night in this parking lot with a shotgun. And I said, can you help me get back to Montclair?
And you were probably about 19 or 20 at the time.
Exactly. And he starts to use the gun pointing at me to point me in the direction. So he says, you go here. And I'm backing away, kind of puzzled to why would he do this? And I'm upset, I'm crying, but I'm terrified to say, why is this person pointing this gun at me in this parking lot? So I back up to get into my car. He spoke to me in monotone. He didn't threaten me, but it was the fear. Obviously there was some level of fear on my face, and he was very comfortable with the fact that I was upset and crying. So fortunately, I made my way back home, but my dad, I got home, he says, well, where were you? And I said, I don't know. I could not remember where I was, but I just remember from that experience how I felt that it changed kind of my point of view on how I viewed police. I'm somewhat conflicted because my entire life, I've been so comfortable with folks who were almost like my family, who, I've been around all of my life, who came to my track meets or, would drive me to school if my dad couldn't drive me. But yet someone that I saw that I went to for help treated me that way was really very disappointing for me.
And I want to continue too to talk about Gary's experiences, and maybe Gary, if you could walk us through your experience. But Rhonda, I'd also, as a mom, like to hear from you, and Roger, as someone who's served as a police officer for so many years, your impression too of what happened to Gary. Gary, you want to tell us a little bit about what happened?
Sure. You want to talk about my experiences growing up first, or just that situation?
Sure. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, you can set. So, I think it's important to understand sort of what good policing can look like I think we have here in Montclair, and a dedication to the community, and then the opposite.
Right. Okay, no problem. So I agree with my mom. I feel like in terms of like a relationship with the police, I feel like it's parallel. I have at the time growing up as a young kid, my grandfather was a chief of police. Uncle, I have 3 uncles that are in police force.
Right.
I have military family members. So just like law enforcement and military, I was always a part of that. I was always around that. And the people that was around, my uncles, my grandfathers and everything, and aunts, they were just good people. They brought me around good people. My grandfather would pick me up from school, and he'd bring me to the police station in his car, and I got to meet a lot of cops and everything, and it was just lovely. It was just great. I said, man, like maybe one day I want to do this. Seemed like a lot of fun, just helping your community and doing the right thing. But my situation was, it was 2018. It was a hot June day. Just got finished taking my SATs, so wanted to blow off a little steam. So I called my boys up. I'm like, yo, let's go to Willowbrook Mall. They're like, okay. So we go to Willowbrook Mall. My friend picks us all up. I believe it's 4 or 5 of us in the car. And we're driving, and the car is in the way. He's making a left turn. So we try to go around the right side. I'm in the passenger seat. My friend is driving. There's 3 or 4 of us 3 or 4 of them in the back. So he goes around, and maybe about 10 seconds later, we hear sirens. And in my head, I'm like, nah, there's no way they're pulling us over. What do we do? And next, you know, you see like 4 or 5 cop cars just behind us. We're like, what's going on? So my friend pulls over. My friend we're 17 years old. He's nervous. So he pulls over and like really, really fast, and like pulls over like to a ditch, like the car like jumps and everything. And we're like all startled at that point. We don't know what is going on. And then, like I said before, 4 or 5 cop cars pull up, two police officers on a bike pull up, and they're like, get out the car, put your hands up. And they pull out Glocks in our faces in the windows. And this is the first time I've ever looked down a barrel of a gun. And I tell you, it was, even though he had the guns at us for maybe about 10 seconds, 15 seconds, it felt like 10, 20 hours. Just looking at it like, this is how it's gonna end? That's just how it felt. Like, man, I thought about my family, I thought about mother, father, sisters, grandparents. It's like, I feel like everything just flashed before me. I'm like, oh my God. I just had my hands up. I had nothing to say. I was just so startled. And then they ended up putting the guns down. But still at that point, it's just like, what is going on? I don't understand. And see all these faces just looking at you. And mind you, we're in a town that we don't really go in. The people that live in the town don't look like us. So we're really startled. And they were asking us a lot of questions. They were asking me questions. I'm like, I'm not even driving. They asked stuff, questions in the back. They took everybody's IDs. They had us on the side of the road for an hour and a half. And we're just trying to go to the mall. And the really sad thing is that when we were on the side of the road, we see cars passing by, and they're just looking at us almost like with disgust, like, what do they do now? Something like, what are they up to now? Must have done something crazy. 4 or 5 black kids in the car, must have done something crazy. And then an older white male comes out of his house. We're in front of somebody's house, and he comes outside, pajamas on, no shirt on, like he just rolled out of bed, and was like, get these hooligans, or I don't know what he said, but get these like thugs from front of my house. And we're just looking at him like, you can't be serious. Like, we're all athletes. All my friends that were in the car, we were going through our senior year. We're all in college. We're playing sports, scholarships, good kids. We were just going to the mall to have fun, blow off some steam after some SATs. And like I said, we were on the side of the road for about an hour and a half, and it was just like wasted time. They ended up saying, all right, have a nice day, whatever. And it just didn't feel like we could have a nice day. We still ended up going to the mall, but that just was in the back of my mind for a while, and it still is. It still bothers me.
So Mikie, can I add a couple of things to that?
Yeah, please.
So when Gary came home and told us the story, of course, we, were upset. And my original feeling was, I've never felt so powerless in my life. So, my husband and I take great pride in our children. We try to teach them right from wrong. We spent a lot of blood, sweat, and tears raising them. And for someone to treat your child with disrespect and then put them in harm's way, I was sad, probably a bit sadder than I was angry. And then anger came soon after. So we gathered our thoughts. We went to the police department in this town and talked about the situation. And there was no empathy, no understanding about why we were upset. We said, we got things about, well, pulling out weapons is the first line of defense. And when I want to clarify a point, because we actually saw the video, what the young man did that was driving is when he pulled over, he hit the curb. That's all he did, is he hit the curb while pulling over. So it wasn't a huge, jolt. It was basically hitting the curb. So first line of defense is pulling out weapons. Second thing is, well, they were speeding. So you pull out, I've been pulled over for speeding, and, generally there's no guns. And then the thing that I thought was most interesting is this is a you know, a ranking official in this town said, well, see, after they pulled them over and their documentation was clear, they treated them well. See how nice they were to these kids? I just could not understand why we were at all upset about anything that transpired on that day.
And Mike, I just want to say that, and you know, the next thing is that I responded to that location to speak to the supervisors, and I was very not happy about the way that they responded. And it's a neighboring community, you know, and I just couldn't believe that that's the way that they thought. And I went there actually with couple of Gary's uncles who at the time were Patterson police officers. So there was Gary's father, Rhonda, and 3 officers. And we didn't let them know at first that we were officers. We wanted to hear what they had to say first. Then we let them know exactly what we believe that the procedures were. Now, I can't understand how it could be that difference in one location than the other, but that's one of the issues that we're dealing with in this country right now. We're supposed to be the United States of America, but when you go into these little towns and little places all around the country, some bigger than others, it seems like it's all different. And I don't understand how that could be. I've never, ever seen so much gunplay in my life, you know, and I served 35 years.
And make no mistake, I mean, this is, if you were on your way, Gary, to Willowbrook Mall, this is a town that was just a matter of miles away from Montclair. This wasn't some other state or some other part of our nation, but even just here in New Jersey. So yeah, I'd love to continue to talk about steps moving forward, but I do want to make sure we get to Leslie, because Leslie, you also have such an interesting background and interesting stories of your own in the tennis circuit.
Yeah, thank you for having this forum, and I want you guys to know that I'm connected to Montclair because every summer I went to Lincoln Street because my one of my grandmothers was there. So
right around the corner.
I know,
right.
I know there, and my best friend lives on Alden Road, so there you go. Well,
great.
Her parents do. But I think, you know, I mean, we all have, any person of color of really any age probably has some story about being discriminated against. And, you know, when we tell these stories, we're not looking for sympathy from people necessarily. We want them to talk about how they're going to change the situation, you know, because I can tell horror stories from, you know, that happened to me when I played professional tennis or just in everyday life. And they can be good, it can be bad. But the article that I wrote was in response to the USTA, United States Tennis Association, saying that they had a long history of equality within the game, when in fact the first 70 years was segregated. And the only way it was integrated was when a tennis champion, American tennis champion, Alice Marble, stepped up and basically said, y'all are hypocrites. You need to let Althea Gibson play in this tournament, and if she's any good, her skills will show that. And so I say that Alice Marble, who was white, embarrassed the USTA enough that they allowed Althea to play. And if you want to just bring it forward, Althea was the first to break the color line. I fit in there somewhere. Arthur was in there, Arthur Ashe, Serena, Venus, Coco, Naomi. Look at where we are. So, but that started with Alice Marble stepping up. And so in order for all of these situations that we all have, and if you're a white person listening to this and you say, well, I have Black friends, my question is, have you spoken to them about institutional racism, whether it's real estate laws that say Black people couldn't live in certain areas, or tokenism where you could only have one Black person at a time play a particular sport, because you have the power to make the changes. People of color, we don't have the power to make the change. So whenever there's a discussion about race, I want to make sure that that I'm also engaging with people not of color, because sometimes it's hard for them to see through our lens, but through the conversation. I had a long discussion with a colleague, and she told me, after I told some of my stories of being discriminated against, she says, yeah, but my family, we weren't rich, and my mom's a single mom. She worked at the post office. You know, we just lived in a small house. And I said, I hear you, but this is what I want you to know. The Black woman working next to your mom did not make as much as your mom, because Black women are paid less. The town that you lived in, that Black woman couldn't live in because of laws that forbid people to lend to Black people. So then that Black woman who was making less than your mom had to live in another town where she couldn't get a mortgage because banks redlined and they would not give her a mortgage. Thus, she had to rent, and her expenses were higher because she didn't have the services there, so she had to travel further. So she did that with less money, and she didn't have wealth to pass on to the next generation. And I think at that moment, that's when she sort of understood. So we're not trying to indict white people. We are just trying to say, when you are a person of color in this world, just last week in a neighborhood where I used to live in, I live in Morristown, a Black family was on a walk. Neighbor waved. On the way back, the neighbor stopped them. Now, this family has lived in this sort of cul-de-sac community. There's only one way in, one way out, and you have to pass this one particular house in order to get in and out. They've been there for 3 years. But the white family, whose house they had to pass twice a day to get in and out of the community, stopped them and said, can I just ask you a question? Did you all get your house because you worked for the Kennedy family? The Kennedy family was the previous owner, but they didn't assume that this Black person got the house based on their business acumen and their ability, their financial well-being. It was because they worked for the white folk, and the white folks left them the house. That's just a mindset. So when you have conversations, when people say racist tropes, that's what you have to check. You know, when people say to me, well, I don't see color. And I'm like, well, that's a racist trope. So let me explain to you why. And I was just on a CBS special Sunday, and someone wrote to me and said, you spoke so well. I'm like, I'm an American. I ought to be able to speak well.
Right.
You're well-meaning, but that's not necessarily, you need to be sensitive to the fact that some things that you mean to say that show how open you are actually stereotypical racist tropes. And when we have conversations like that, and when they involve white people, you're able to do it. I've been very involved in that athlete activism space, and the training that I do with them has always been about how to present your best self. But I always give a codicil if it's an athlete of color, say, but there's no guarantee you won't end up under somebody's knee. But it's, in order to be taken seriously, you still have to be able to articulate your point well, and to show your opinions like Osaka's doing, like LeBron is doing. So that's sort of my passion in Win for Life training, to help athletes navigate that space. And then they'll respond, you know, because just in this US Open, if Djokovic, who got disqualified because he hit a linesperson with the ball, if that had been a Black player, there would have been no conversation. DQ, out, off, done. There would have not been the nice little few minutes of conversation that Novak had with the referees. It just wouldn't have happened. And the same way, you know, when Serena had her issues, some brought on by her coach, how she was vilified. So there is that double standard, but we want people to be able to acknowledge it and to see it, but then to talk about how I'm not going to respond that way anymore, or mainly be more educated.
And these are some of the conversations you have with your program, Win for Life?
You know, it has just happened that I have it because of the way it is. I was working with some younger athletes, and so they started talking about all of their stereotypes based on their ethnicity. And I tell you, it was a rainbow coalition, because there were Asian kids, Hispanic kids, Indian kids, no Native American, but Southeast Asian. And so one particular Asian kid said, when I show up at the tournament, they say things like, oh, the Jeopardy Bowl is down the street, meaning you're not supposed to be here for the tennis. Or to the black player, they say, well, they're not playing basketball here today. Why are you here? I'm talking 2020. And my favorite one was the Southeast Asian kid. He said, everybody thinks I can spell. I can't spell, but everybody thinks I can.
That's something.
Because we've seen over the years that a lot of times the winner of the spelling bee happens to have been Southeast Asian. So, you know, it was how to help them navigate in that space, and just for each person to identify something that was going on that impacted them. It made them think about, oh, okay, I'm not the only one that this happens to, and I need to decide how I'm going to respond, or I've learned now how to respond or when it's worth responding to.
I think that's such a good lesson. And I have to say that it's so powerful to have all of you speaking out, and so important. And I think these are tough conversations. I think there's a lot of people who want this country to be better, want us to move forward in a better way, but it's just too hard. It's just easier to duck your head and not ask the hard questions, because maybe the question you ask is a racist trope. Maybe you say, oh, well, my mom was a poor single mom, as the woman was discussing, and that's, and you know, and you're trying to be empathetic, but then the person you're talking to alerts you to the fact that actually that's not very helpful at all, and you put yourself out there, which I think you need to do. But that's why I love, Leslie, how you sort of took that as an education opportunity to say, okay, but this, and so how do you know how to pick your moments? How do you know when you have that opportunity to make it an educational opportunity? I know that when I faced sexism in the Navy, there were times, because I would get, you know, some of the things you were reminding me of were things that would make my skin crawl, like, oh, you don't look like a helicopter pilot. Great. You know, it's hard to put your finger on why that's offensive. You can't say, you know, if you say, what do you mean I don't look like a helicopter pilot? They'd be like, oh, I just, you know, you look great. You know, it's kind of hard to, you feel like, oh, am I, you know, is it time to put myself out and say that's inappropriate? That's demeaning. You know, that's why we need more women helicopter pilots, so you're not so confused. You know, that kind of thing. So how do you know when is the moment to sort of kind of say something, and how do you say something? What's the best way to engage so that instead of having that person leave feeling defensive and like, I'm never having that conversation again, or I'm never going to bring that up again, they leave feeling empowered to make change?
For me, it's about the need for people to be educated. And so, you know, and it depends on my relationship with the person. So someone that I knew that coached at a university for quite a long time said, hey, I'm a white guy, I'm 45 years old, I don't know what to say to my team, and I got to talk about race. And I said, well, I'm not the person to educate you, because you need to get educated in the basics. And just by the fact that you asked that question shows me that race has not been an important issue for you to learn about and to know about. So come back to me when you're more educated. I'll send you some links that you can look at, and then you can ask me more detailed. And I sort of relate it to when I deal with athletes and Win for Life training. And one of the things I say is you should always know who's in the room. And so when I come into the room and I say, okay, who am I? And the athletes might say, well, you're a teacher, or are you a coach? And they might get around to, do I play tennis? And I say, okay, if that was your only question that you got to ask me, I'm going to say, yes, I play tennis. But if you were educated when you walked into this room, you could have asked, what was it like to play on the center court of some of the biggest stages in the sport, which is a much more detailed and helpful answer than, do I play tennis? So I sort of use that tact for people, because when you sort of dismissively say, well, tell me what I should say, again, that's using your privilege because you haven't had the chance. And I pick my battles. Some people some people can hear you, others can't. It's exhausting enough to be Black. And now you want me to teach you what it's like to be Black? Well, race is not a difficult conversation for us, people of color, because we talk about it all the time. The difference has been now, once I wrote that article, it's very cathartic. Now, I'm not trying to make you feel comfortable. I'm going to tell you exactly what happens, how I feel, and what the deal is. So, because we got a whole baggage of stuff that happens. You could just pick a topic. You could pick a day of the week. all of us have it, right? So don't all of a sudden Johnny come lately ask me what's it like to be Black. You know, learn some history, know some stuff, and then we can have a more detailed conversation. It would be like whatever sport somebody might play, and it's the first time you're going to play the sport, and you're asking for a very detailed thing to do within the sport. Or let's say flying a helicopter, the first day you can't do it. You got to learn so you can do it. And race is the same.
And Gary,
Excellent.
what have you, as you've been hearing everyone's kind of story and engagement, do you have any sense of what your generation feels like how did we fail you? But how can we fix it? What do we need to do moving forward?
How do you do? I think just keep it in mind, keep it in everybody's minds. Like, I love how everybody has a voice. Like, you have an Instagram, you have a Twitter, you have a Snapchat, you have whatever. Everybody has a voice. Everybody can speak their opinion. And I feel like it may not change everybody, but it's a spark. It's going to spark one brain, and then one brain is going to spark another, and another, and then it may not be our generation that makes the change, but it could be the next one. And then the one after that can make a significant change. So it's going to take some time, but it can be done.
Well, I know you're in the arts, Gary, and that was very eloquent. I'm not surprised. And Rhonda, what kind of have you been looking at? What do you want for the future? I know I just know as a mom, and you telling that story, and I can't even imagine, because the thing you just hate in your kids, and you know it's necessary for them to grow up, but you hate any loss of innocence, and you hate when they learn sometimes what's going on. So sort of, how have you moved forward and thought about, what do we need to do better, and how can we do it better?
I mean, the three words that kind of come to mind are caring, compassion, and understanding. So if there's some level of compassion, you show some compassion for other people and understand that they're different, and you may not necessarily even have to like why they're different, but have some level of compassion and be educated about why they're different and what some of the drivers are that build that person's personality. One of the points that Leslie made, and I was nodding here, is it's exhausting. You feel like you're always on, that you're in a position where you have to educate people. And there are times where you just let people be ignorant in their own space because you're just exhausted. But to Gary's point, allowing that level of ignorance is not helping that spark. And maybe that person would understand why they're ignorant, and it could potentially help other generations to come. So it's important just that we understand one another and just understand why we're different and celebrate those differences. I think that's probably the most important thing that we can do as a society right now.
And Roger, I know that you probably have deep concerns and opinions as somebody who's, I'm sure, takes a great deal of pride in your career as a police officer, and the changes that I'm sure you saw over time here in Montclair. What do you think we need to do on a statewide and nationwide level?
Well, first of all, it was great hearing from everyone, especially when you talk about education. I think education, like Rhonda said, empathy, for individuals who are in certain circumstances, empathy for the folks that haven't been as fortunate as you have been. There are plenty of people out there that are struggling today. If you want to be in law enforcement, if you really want to help people, you cannot do it without having a level of empathy. I thought back what it was like in 1973, and it was a little difficult getting in the car with certain individuals. There were some people that had never been around any minorities before, and so here's their first challenge, finding out what I was going to be like. Am I going to support them in a difficult situation? Because unlike anything else, and you've been in the military, there are situations that you're going to come across where if that individual is not going to have your back, it's going to be a problem. But however, that whatever is done has to be lawful. You cannot hide anything. You hear people talk all the time about the thin blue line and all of that, where there's certain cover-ups, and that always has been wrong. That's been something wrong that shouldn't be done. So we need education, we need training, a lot more training. Somehow or another, we need to bring the departments together. You need to infiltrate some of the departments. We need more minorities to get involved in policing, also not step away from it. And I understand it's a dangerous occupation. So a lot of people don't want to become involved. Somehow or another, we need to make it safe. We need to have body cameras so we're aware of like everything that's going on. And by the way, most of what we're seeing right now is because of cell phones and body cameras. Just think about that. Before that, just you can only imagine what has been going on for years and years and years. And that's the sad piece all about it. Some of it that I witnessed over the years, but I will say that the majority of officers that I ever worked with were conscientious. They were family-minded individuals. They cared about their families. They cared about my family, because I invited them to the house. So, and I owe you a barbecue. I know
I was going to say, oh, they got invited to the house? Oh, how interesting, Roger. Huh. I bet that was nice for them.
I invited them to the house so they could see my family, be introduced to my family, who we were, that were real flesh and blood caring individuals like that. It needs to be more of that. And one other thing that I'll say before I'll step aside, a lot of this is coming from the top. Needless to say, whether you're Republican or a Democrat, this gentleman who is the president right now has done a lot of damage in this country. Now, we can go around and around. I know a lot of people, a lot of my friends are Republican and they support him 110%. I just can't see that. That to me, we are definitely going backwards, and I'm fearful to think what could happen down the line if it stays in this direction.
Yeah, I agree. And thank you all. As I said, these stories need to be heard, but these conversations can be hard, and quite frankly, it's often, as we've said, exhausting. It's just easier not to have them. It would just be easier to sort of all, relax and not face the hard conversations that I think this country desperately needs. So I really appreciate so much everybody today coming on and talking about this and talking about some of the ways forward, and for giving us another chance to listen. It's not the responsibility of Black Americans to change the minds of white Americans. We need to take ownership for doing that ourselves. But these conversations help. I think these conversations help and to open people's minds. So I know we need to do more than just listen and empathize, and that's why I'm so interested in the paths forward. Leslie, I loved your example of Alice Marble and the power of standing up in the way she did. And so I'm going to use that to inspire my own actions and constantly keep that in mind, that we all have a great deal of responsibility, that we as white Americans have a responsibility here to make the change that we want to see. So while it was nobody here had a responsibility to talk, I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. I think these are incredibly important conversations. I think the more people understand, you talked about empathy and compassion. I think these conversations breed empathy and compassion.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's my deepest hope. So thank you all so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you.
Absolutely.